This is the Big Small Business Show. Welcome back. Now, my guest in our Psyche of Success slot today is Professor Khalil Osiris. Now, he spent 20 years in prison in America and used this time wisely to obtain both his bachelor's and master's degree. He also gained a deep understanding into his own psyche and how to turn obstacles into opportunity. Now, living in South Africa now, he established the first Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports, or PBIS, Africa School in Johannesburg, and implemented GOSO, which stands for Get Out and Stay Out Restorative Justice Program with our Department of Correctional Services. Welcome, Khalil.
Good morning.
Right, so let's talk about your journey. Now, 20 years in prison. Americans like to say you were incarcerated for 20 years. Some people talk about crime, the life of crime, as a form of expression of power or lack of power.
Yes.
And for many young entrepreneurs, I see entrepreneurship as another form of expression of power.
Yes.
Okay, or of themselves. Do you see? Do you agree with that statement?
Well, first of all, I have found in my journey that many of the people who would make incredible entrepreneurs, very successful entrepreneurs, are oftentimes involved with crime.
Yes.
So when you get to prison and you see all these individuals who have had an incredible spirit to just go out and challenge the world and even want to change the world in some way, you see that it's been misguided. What I say to them when I'm trying to pull them back from that life is that you've got great principles. They get up early in the morning, they'll stay out all night, they will be on time to work every day, religiously. But I say you have a horrible product. So the principles and the products don't align. And what my thinking is that if you can get that person to see that there are other ways to be empowered and there are other ways to build a successful life, and that the things they're doing can be turned to a positive end, that to me is the holy grail of transformation when you have people who have taken that path of crime or criminality. So yes, to a very great extent, I agree exactly with what you're saying. And the key is, what do they value? Because crime is about values. It's not just that a person decides to go out and hurt people or take people's things. It's more than that. And I don't buy the argument that it's very much a result of poverty, because I say that the majority of the world is poor and they don't become criminals. So you have to think very deeply about what the implications of crime are and how do we turn that towards entrepreneurship. And this question you're asking is also critical for the reason, Alon, that if you look at it, you hear people coming out of prison, and the number one thing they say is no one will hire them. Fine. What I say is many people are justified in not hiring someone like me who spent 20 years in prison. I mean, I was 40 years old by the time I got out. And there was no evidence of what my skill set was and what I would be, what kind of person I had become during that time. People didn't know me, but they did know my past. And so entrepreneurship is perhaps one of the most important kinds of skill sets and thinking that one can engage in during their incarceration. And when they get out, you've got to be very clear about how you will begin to rebuild your life. And the one door that's always open, no one can veto your desire to be a better person, is if you choose to be an entrepreneur.
And I mean, you started off in quite a bad way and landed up, you know, a professor, and you moved to a new country, and a huge success. Take us quickly through that journey.
Okay, well, my incarceration was very much a consequence of the fact that in America during my childhood, it was a very turbulent time, the civil rights movement. What emerged out of that was the black nationalist movement and a lot of political turmoil during that period that had a direct impact on my psyche, on the way that I thought about the world and what my role should be in making change in my community. That enthusiasm about making change was very much misguided. And I say it was misguided because I was a very angry young person the more I got involved with the movement in the context of seeing injustice. But I didn't have the maturity to really figure out what to do about it. And I became, like many young people, quite reactionary. That anger turned into delinquency, and the delinquency turned into crime. So at the age of 17, I had committed a robbery and was sent to prison, served 5 years in prison, and as a consequence of that, became something of an even more angry person under those circumstances. Despite the intent for rehabilitation, it got worse. So after being released at the age of 22, I was much worse and went on to commit more crimes. So you hear the stories about how people come out and they go right back, or they come out and they get involved in further crime, and you ask yourself, what happened? Well, it's because nothing changed in terms of your values. Nothing changed in terms of your thinking during that time. Because that was the case with me, within 3 years I was back in prison for another crime, a robbery again. And this time I would go on to serve 15 years. So that by the time I got out, and I must say that during my second incarceration is where the penny dropped, so to speak. It was when I realized that I wasn't going to prison because I had been in the Black Panther Party. I wasn't going to prison because I had made a mistake. I was going to prison because of my choices. And I understood that in a very concrete way at that point in my life. I was 25 years old. My sentence was 15 to 75 years. And the judge was very clear. He said, you'll do one of two things. You'll either make good choices and perhaps have an opportunity to get out, or you'll continue on the path that you're on, young man, and you'll probably die in prison. So it was a very serious period in my life, in my journey, and I had to decide what I wanted to do with it. I decided that I would make the best choices I could going forward, no matter how difficult the challenge would be, and I began to do that. One thing by one step, and then the next step. And ultimately, as you read, I went on to earn my bachelor's and master's degree. But during that time, I also I began to correspond and become pen pals with Makaziwe Mandela, who's the eldest daughter of Madiba. And through her, ended up writing Madiba while he was at Poolsmoor. And I really just wanted to know how he was spending his time, because in America, I looked around the world. Those of us who were in America, particularly at the bottom of life in prison, were absolutely inspired by his example. And while we knew that we were there in prison for reasons that had to do with crime and violence and all those things, we saw in him an example of what you could become. And I wanted to know, how was he spending his time? That question.
We've run out of time. I want to have you back on the show. I want to talk about two things. I want to take this conversation further, and I also want to hear more about what you do as a social entrepreneur. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Alon.
Now, up next, I'm joined by Shane Mann, co-founder of Man-Made Media. If you've ever wondered what corporate storytelling is, stay tuned to find out.